The night was thick with silence, but inside Graceland, the atmosphere was electric with tension. It was Christmas Eve, 1975, and the air was thick with more than just the smell of pine and cinnamon. The house was bustling with activity, but there was a sense that something was off. Something was about to break. In the den, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was surrounded by his closest friends and family, but the mood was far from festive. His Aunt Delta, a woman who was usually the life of the party, was drunk and belligerent. She sat on the floor, her words slurred and her eyes bloodshot, a stark contrast to the usual warmth of the holiday season. Elvis's friends, Marty Lacker and Lamar Fike, were trying to keep the evening from spiraling out of control. They were used to dealing with the unusual, but this was different. Delta's behavior was becoming more erratic by the minute, and it was clear that she was about to do something that would change the evening forever. Lamar, who had been sitting on the floor, trying to distract Delta with small talk, suddenly felt her eyes lock onto him. Her voice, thick with alcohol, cut through the room like a knife. "You're a son of a bitch. I don't like you," she spat. Lamar was taken aback, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known Delta for years, and he had always been respectful to her. "Why, Delta? I've never done anything to you," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Elvis, who was sitting next to his wife, Linda, looked down at his aunt, his jaw tightening. Delta didn't seem to care. She turned her attention to T.G. Shepherd, a country singer who was also in the room. "And you ain't worth a shit, either, you wall-eyed son of a bitch," she slurred, her voice rising. Lamar could see that Delta was serious. She reached into her purse, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Elvis jumped to his feet, his eyes wide with alarm. "You ain't going to do no such goddamn thing," he shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. Delta, undeterred, screamed, "You shut up, cause I'm getting ready to blow a hole in your damn head." Elvis, red-faced and furious, didn't hesitate. "Some of you guys get up here. Get this drunken bitch off this plane and take her home," he bellowed. The room erupted into chaos as people scrambled to comply with his order. Lamar, still standing over Delta, felt a mix of fear and anger. He knew that if she pulled out a gun, things could turn deadly in an instant. Elvis, his face contorted with rage, was already calling for help. "Man, I'm sorry," he said, his voice a mix of apology and frustration. The group managed to get Delta off the plane and into a car, but the damage was done. The holiday spirit was shattered, and the tension in the air was palpable. Elvis, who had been trying to enjoy the evening, was now visibly shaken. He turned to Lamar and T.G. Shepherd, his eyes filled with a mix of hurt and anger. "I'm sorry, guys, I don't know what got into her," he said, his voice breaking. Lamar, trying to defuse the situation, replied, "That's all right, Elvis. You know I understand. Don't worry about it." But the night was far from over. As the group made their way back to Graceland, the tension continued to simmer. Elvis, who was usually the life of the party, was now withdrawn and distant. The once bright lights of the holiday decorations seemed to dim, and the laughter that had filled the room earlier was now replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Back at Graceland, the night took another turn. Around 2 in the morning, Elvis's cousin, Billy Smith, was jolted awake by a loud noise. He grabbed his gun and rushed to the door, only to find Elvis, wild-eyed and red-faced, beating on the door with his cane. "What in God's name is wrong?" Billy asked, his heart racing. Elvis, who was usually composed, was now a mess. He was sputtering, his words coming out in a jumbled mess. "Goddamn it, I'll kill that bitch. I'll sew her cunt up and throw her over that damn wall." He raged, his face contorted with fury. Billy, trying to calm his cousin, led him inside. Elvis, still ranting and raving, started beating the floor with his cane, then the couch. "That goddamn Aunt Delta, that old whore has got to go," he shouted, his voice breaking with each word. For the next few minutes, Elvis continued to rant, his words a mix of anger and hurt. "She's cussed and abused my friends with her language, and I'm sick of her," he yelled. "How dare she do something like that? Goddamn it. I took her in out of the goodness of my heart, and I'll kick her fat ass out. She would do that to a friend of mine for no reason at all. She embarrassed the shit out of me." Billy, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to reason with Elvis. "Elvis, let's sit down and talk this thing out. This is an old woman you're talking about. You know how she is when she gets to drinking," he said, his voice calm and steady. Elvis, still seething, listened for a moment. "You're right," he said, his voice softening. "But she's got to apologize. I can't let this slide." And so the night continued, with Elvis and Billy trying to find a way to make things right. But the damage had been done, and the holiday that was supposed to be filled with joy and laughter was now marred by the words and actions of a drunk and angry woman. Billy Smith, one of Elvis's closest friends, had a lot to say about the early 70s. He remembered a time when Elvis, known for his charm and charisma, crossed a line with Billy Stanley. Billy was married to an 18-year-old girl named Angie, who, according to Elvis, was making advances towards him. Elvis, seeing an opportunity, set Billy up with another girl so he could be with Angie. Later, Billy wrote a book where he mentioned that Ricky told him Elvis and Angie had a brief affair lasting about a month. Elvis felt bad about it, but Billy wasn't sure if anything actually happened. When he asked Elvis about it in 1975, Elvis said they just talked, and he preached to her a little bit, but nothing more. Elvis was capable of it, though. Marty Lacker, another close friend, remembered an incident where Elvis and Billy Stanley were walking down the steps into the den. Marty was thinking about Elvis and Angie, and Elvis seemed to know. He glanced at Billy and then at Marty, saying, "Well, it ain't like he's my brother." It was a subtle way of acknowledging the tension. On New Year's Eve in 1974, Elvis had a big concert at the Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan. It set a world record for the largest attendance at a single performance, with nearly 80,000 people. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, scaled some of the tickets up to $15, and the gate receipts were around $816,000. Billy Smith remembered that the Colonel didn't always play it right, but every concert Elvis did was sold out. Sometimes, sections were closed off to make it look full. Elvis didn't like big outdoor venues, but he put extra effort into the Silverdome show. During one song, he heard the sound of cloth ripping and realized he had torn the seat of his suit. He asked the singers to perform "Sweet, Sweet Spirit" while he fixed his suit. In 1975, Miss Miller, who had been Alex Schuffy's secretary in Vegas, started working for the Colonel. She became his confidante and friend, especially after his wife developed Alzheimer's. After Mrs. Parker passed away, the Colonel and Miss Miller got married. Priscilla, Elvis's ex-wife, also had a wild phase in 1975. After breaking up with Mike Stone, she started dating a lot of people. One of her boyfriends, Mike Edwards, wrote that Priscilla disappeared for 2 days and came back saying she had been with Julio Iglesias in Miami. Priscilla later confirmed to Vanity Fair that they had a fling but didn't consummate it. Lamar Fike believed that being with Elvis had influenced her behavior. Linda, one of Elvis's girlfriends, started seeing David Briggs, his keyboard player, in late 1975. Linda and Elvis's relationship was becoming strained. Elvis bought her a house away from Graceland, which was a sign of their troubled relationship. Elvis was never faithful to any woman for long, and this pattern was affecting Linda. In January 1976, the Colonel demanded more money from Elvis. Instead of a third of the net profits from tours, he now took half, along with half of the money from television specials and merchandising. The Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas was fed up with Elvis's behavior, so he didn't play there in January. Elvis's 41st birthday in Vail, Colorado, was supposed to be a dream vacation, but it turned into a nightmare. Elvis was heavily under the influence of Dilaudid and threatened to kill people. He flew Dr. Nick in to get more prescriptions and spent nearly $70,000 on 5 luxury cars for his Denver cop friends. He even told a wild story about going on a drug raid, but Billy Smith didn't believe it. Elvis's extravagance was evident when he took the Convair 880 to Denver for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Lamar Fike set it up, and they flew to Stapleton Airport for a catered lunch. The trip cost between $20,000 and $40,000, but it was just an excuse to get a badge from the Denver police. Elvis's drug use became a serious issue. On one of his trips to Denver, he showed a prescription to Dr. Starkey, who suspected Elvis was using. The cops tried to talk to him about it, but Elvis checked out of the hotel and left. Elvis's obsession with law enforcement continued. He would put on a uniform and stop traffic, giving people safety lectures and autographs. He even tried to get involved in a drug bust, but it didn't go as planned. He had a list of drug dealers he wanted to eliminate, but his friends talked him out of it. Elvis's drug use and erratic behavior affected his recording sessions. In February 1976, RCA brought a portable recording truck to Graceland. Elvis recorded the From Elvis Presley Boulevard, Memphis, Tennessee album and the Moody Blue album. The songs Moody Blue and Way Down reflected his tired and sick state. Elvis's friends were worried about him. His behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable, and his health was deteriorating. The end was near, and everyone could feel it. Billy Smith remembered a time when Elvis played bass guitar on Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. Felton, one of the band members, always bragged about it. Elvis had a great time during those recording sessions. When J.D. hit a really low note on Way Down, Elvis burst out laughing and playfully teased him, saying, "J.D., that's lower than whale shit." During one of the breaks, Elvis and Joe put on big wide brim hats, black coats, and sunglasses. They even had 2 submachine guns, but they were plugged and couldn't fire. Elvis pretended to be a mobster and yelled, "I didn't want to do any recording in the first place. I'll give you 5 seconds to clear out, and then we're going to shoot up all this equipment." Everyone knew it was a joke, but the guy in the sound truck didn't. The next day, the story spread that Elvis had gone crazy and shot up the place. That was one time when Elvis's sense of humor backfired. When Elvis went back on tour in March, things started to change. He had to read his lyrics from a cue sheet, and he started wearing a corset to help with his weight. Lamar Fike noticed how heavy Elvis had become and told the Colonel, "Look at him, he weighs 250 pounds. Elvis's jumpsuits were so tight that Lamar joked, "If that metal starts flying off, you'll kill the first 5 rows from shrapnel." Elvis laughed, but the joke wasn't far from the truth. Elvis's voice also changed. Cheryl Nielsen and Larry Strickland, his backup singers, sometimes had to help him hit the high and low notes he couldn't reach anymore. On Unchained Melody, the last 4 notes are actually Nielsen's, but the audience never knew the difference. Elvis's health was getting worse. He would eat a lot of junk food, and then not eat for days. His body was so tired that even simple things exhausted him. He had a lot of digestive problems, and had to use enemas regularly. Billy Smith remembered how Elvis would sometimes fall asleep in the bathroom, because the sleeping pills he took would kick in before he could make it back to bed. Lamar Fike said, "The unraveling was astonishing. Elvis would go from diarrhea to constipation, and his system was really messed up." The drugs and cortisone injections for his colon issues made him gain even more weight. By 1976, his body was beyond repair. Elvis's friends knew he was in bad shape, but they didn't want to admit it. One night in 1976, Elvis woke up and came to Billy's room. He was half-drugged and couldn't find Billy's room. When he finally found it, he sat on the bed and told Billy about a dream he had where he saw the face of God. Elvis was so upset that he lay down on the bed and fell asleep. Billy and his wife Jo had to take him back to his room the next morning. Elvis's business ventures were also failing. He got involved in a racquetball court project, but he didn't understand the financial details. When he realized how much money he had to put up, he backed out of the deal. The Colonel was furious. Elvis fired Dr. Nick and Joe, but later took Joe back. Elvis's performances were becoming more difficult. In Lake Tahoe, he used an oxygen tank on stage to keep his energy up. He even brought the tank out with him, joking about it to the audience, but it was clear that he was struggling. In July, Elvis's world fell apart. He fired his longtime friends Red and Sonny, and even had his dad, Vernon, do the dirty work. Red and Sonny were devastated. They had been with Elvis since high school and felt betrayed. Elvis's health and mood were getting worse, and his friends could see that he was losing control. Lamar Fike said, "We all knew it. You can tell when someone is dying." Elvis was getting rid of money like it was going out of season. He talked a lot about his mother's death and how short her life had been. One day he said to Lamar, "I'll never be an old man." Lamar knew what he meant. Elvis knew he was running out of time. Billy Smith couldn't believe what was happening. He and the other guys had been Elvis's closest friends for years. But suddenly, everything changed. It all started when Sonny and Red confronted Elvis about the drugs. Red especially had been firm about it. They even intercepted some of the stuff coming in, but it didn't help. Elvis was at a breaking point. Marty Lacker remembered how they tried to figure out what to do. They called Elvis, but he wouldn't talk to them. Vernon, Elvis's father, had some excuses about expenses, but it was clear that Vernon, Colonel, Charlie, Dr. Nick, and Joe thought Red and Sonny were causing too many lawsuits by hitting people. But Red and Sonny were just trying to protect Elvis. They were doing their jobs. Lamar Fike said Vernon just saw a chance to get rid of Red and Sonny and took it. Elvis was running from his problems, and he made it worse by leaving Palm Springs and going to Vegas. He stayed at Dr. Gainham's house, where Gainham had a special room built for Elvis. He said it was for a sleep diet or some rest cure, maybe to get Elvis off drugs, but it didn't work. Dave found out Elvis was there and went to Gainham's house, but Gainham wouldn't let him see Elvis. Billy Smith thought Gainham's place wasn't much help. Gainham didn't really care about getting Elvis off anything. Lamar Fike said the room was just part of Gainham's house, with shag carpet, a bed on a dais, and mirrors everywhere. Gainham put Elvis on a lot of medication, calling it sleep therapy, but all it did was keep Elvis drugged up and not eating. Elvis stayed there for a few days, and it was really sad. He couldn't even take care of himself. Marty Lacker said Elvis's true intention was to teach Red, Sonny, and Dave a lesson. He told his father to give them $5,000 each and tell them they'd be hired back, but Vernon didn't do it. When the situation with Red and Sonny came up, Elvis called Frank Sinatra for help. Frank offered to do whatever he could, but Elvis said he'd handle it. In July, they were playing in Virginia, and Elton John came backstage. He met Elvis, they talked, and Elton left. Later, Elton said he looked into Elvis's eyes and saw nothing there, but Marty thought Elton was just dreaming. Stars think they're psychiatrists, but they are not. When Elvis and the guys came back from Vegas, Billy called the house. Elvis didn't want anyone around, saying he needed peace and quiet. Billy set up a schedule for the guys to come in shifts, but it never changed. Marty never saw Elvis again after that night in July. Elvis told Billy he was tired of everyone being around. It wasn't fun anymore. Billy said he'd stay, and they could have the other guys come in shifts. But Elvis got tired of Charlie, who would get drunk and whine. One night, Charlie went to Elvis's room and started crying. Elvis got frustrated and yelled at Charlie. Charlie kept being obnoxious, so Elvis slapped him, making his nose bleed. It really upset Elvis, but he wouldn't apologize. Charlie kept saying it was okay, but it was a shock to everyone. Lamar Fike had intestinal bypass surgery in 1976. Elvis called the hospital and stayed on the line for over 40 hours, making sure Lamar was okay. He paid all the bills, showing how much he cared. Marty Lacker realized he needed to change his life. One night, he reached for his pills, but something made him stop. He started thinking about living his life without them. It took him 6 months to withdraw, but he did it with God's help. He never took another pill again. Billy Smith was Elvis's closest friend. He was with Elvis 18 hours a day, at least 6 days a week. Elvis wanted to talk about old times, and felt the younger guys didn't understand him. He was confused about why the old group wasn't still loyal. He kept saying, "Where's the loyalty?" Elvis would spend days in his bedroom, lying on his extra king-size bed. The room was like a cave, with red shag carpet, a padded ceiling, and mirrors everywhere. It was where he spent his last year. Marty Lacker described the room in detail. It had a study with a piano, a desk, and a TV. The bedroom was huge, with a custom-built bed, lounge chairs, and multiple TV. The bathroom was luxurious, with black and gold tiles, a big shower, and a black toilet. Elvis even had a reading chair, which was actually a barber's chair. Elvis's delusions got worse. One day, he saw Jimmy Gamble playing guns with the kids, and thought Jimmy was an assassin. Elvis grabbed a machine gun and went outside, yelling he'd kill him. They had to explain it was just Jimmy. Another time, Elvis woke up from his sleeping pills and went outside to shoot a snake. He was so out of it that he kept missing and almost hit people on the road. Marty Lacker said Elvis called Dr. Nick again, soon after Marion Cock left. Dr. Nick had a nurse, Tish Henley, move into a trailer at Graceland to keep a closer eye on what Elvis took. He didn't want Elvis to wake up and take whatever was on his nightstand. and miscalculate. Tish was Elvis's personal assistant, and she played a significant role in managing his medications. She would often pick up prescriptions from a pharmacy called the Prescription House, which was right across the street from Dr. Nick's office. Dr. Nick was Elvis's trusted physician, but things got complicated. Tish would keep all the medications in a locked overnight bag in her trailer, but Elvis was smart and knew how to get what he wanted. Billy Smith, one of Elvis's closest friends, noticed that something was off with the amount of medication Elvis was getting. He confronted Dr. Nick, who admitted that Elvis was taking too much. Dr. Nick worried that if he cut Elvis off completely, Elvis would just find another doctor, so they decided to try a different approach. They started to substitute some of the drugs with placebos like sugar or sweet and low in capsules, or diluted the stronger medications with water or saline. Billy even tested some of these placebos on himself to make sure Elvis wouldn't notice. But Elvis was a seasoned user and quickly caught on. To control Elvis's drug intake more effectively, Dr. Nick and Billy came up with a system of medication packets. These packets were given to Elvis at specific times of the day and night. The first packet usually contained a mix of sleeping pills and other necessary medications. If Elvis asked for more, the second packet would be brought out, which might have a few more sleeping pills. The third packet was stronger, and it was rarely needed. Despite these efforts, Elvis often outsmarted them. He would increase the doses of tablets to get the same effect as the shots. Elvis's drug use was even more intense when he was on tour. Dr. Nick had a detailed drug protocol that outlined 6 stages of medication. Stage 1 was a morning dose, which included a voice shot to help Elvis's voice, appetite suppressants, and other supplements. Stage 2 was an hour before his performance, with a mix of stimulants and painkillers. Stage 3, just before the show, included more stimulants and painkillers. Stage 4, right after the show, was to bring Elvis down with sedatives and watered-down painkillers. Stage 5 was before bed, with a mix of sedatives and other medications. Stage 6, if needed, was even stronger sedatives to help him sleep. Despite Dr. Nick's claims that he gave Elvis placebos 80% of the time, others were skeptical. Billy thought it was more like half and half. They tried everything they could to help Elvis, even stealing his drugs when he was asleep and flushing them down the toilet. But it was a constant battle. Elvis's drug use took a toll on his performances. In May, during a show in Tahoe, he had trouble walking and remembering the lyrics to his songs. By October, he looked better, but his attitude had worsened. He refused to rehearse, saying, "Hell, I know this. Let's get it over with." He didn't want to change the show, even though he hadn't performed for weeks. In October, Elvis found out that Red, Sonny, and Dave were writing a book about him. He was devastated and angry. He called everyone into his hotel room and cried, asking what they had on Red and Sonny. The book was meant to expose Elvis's drug use and other personal issues. Elvis was afraid that his fans, who were mostly conservative and middle-aged, would turn against him. He even threatened to confront Red and Sonny, but he calmed down and eventually said, "You know, I guess they did what they needed to do, but I wish they hadn't done it." The book, Elvis, What Happened, came out 2 weeks before Elvis's death. It sold 3.5 million copies and is still in print. The timing was bad for Elvis, as it broke the mafia code of silence among his close friends. Elvis's personal life was also falling apart. Linda, his girlfriend, left him in early November. She wrote him a Dear John letter, delivered by her brother, Sam. She was tired of Elvis's drug use and his reluctance to marry her. Elvis had been encouraging her to spend money, but when his father, Vernon, saw the bills, he and others started calling Linda names. Despite this, Linda felt she had earned everything she got from Elvis. Elvis's world was collapsing, and the people around him were struggling to keep him safe and sane, but it was a losing battle. Elvis Presley's life was a whirlwind of fame, fortune, and heartache. One of the women who entered his world was Ginger Alden, a beauty queen who caught his eye. George Klein, Elvis's longtime friend, brought Ginger to Graceland along with her sisters, Terry and Rosemary. Terry was the reigning Miss Tennessee, and Ginger had her own titles, like Miss Mid-South and Miss Traffic Safety. It was a strange twist of fate because Elvis had met Ginger before, when she was just a little girl. Her family was always around Graceland, and her mother was a huge Elvis fan. Even Ginger's father, an army sergeant, was in the room when Elvis was inducted into the service. Despite their history, Elvis and Ginger's relationship was rocky from the start. Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, described Ginger as a pretty woman who looked a lot like Priscilla, Elvis's ex-wife. She had dark, teased hair and wore a lot of makeup. But Ginger wasn't as caring or nurturing as Linda, Elvis's previous girlfriend. Elvis seemed to be more interested in the fact that Ginger was young and beautiful, and he wanted to be seen with her. He even asked Billy if he thought Ginger was a virgin, right in front of her. When Ginger said she was, Elvis seemed to believe her, even though the relationship wasn't as passionate as it used to be with his other partners. Lamar Fike, another close friend, revealed that Elvis was having trouble in the bedroom, largely due to the drugs he was taking. Dr. Nick, Elvis's doctor, was giving him testosterone to help with impotence. This was a sensitive topic, and Elvis never talked about it openly. Despite his struggles, Elvis tried to maintain his image as a virile, powerful man. He would tell his friends things like, "We had a lot of fun last night," even when they knew it wasn't true. The relationship with Ginger was more about companionship than anything else. Elvis would spend a lot of time on the phone with her, even when he was supposed to be recording in Nashville. He ended up staying at a hotel for days without singing a single note, which frustrated his manager, Colonel Parker. Ginger's family also became a part of Elvis's life, and he bought them a house, cars, and took them on trips. But Ginger didn't seem to reciprocate the same level of commitment. She didn't want to move into Graceland, spend the night, or go on all the tours with him. In December 1976, Elvis's performance in Las Vegas was a disaster. He was incoherent, forgot lyrics, and even sat down during a show because he claimed to have sprained his ankle. His father, Vernon, even had to be hospitalized with chest pains. The show at the Hilton was so bad that people asked for refunds and said they wouldn't come back. Elvis's behavior became increasingly erratic, and he even interrupted Don Rickles' show by reading from a religious book, much to the confusion of the audience. Elvis's health and mental state were deteriorating. Some say he was cramming for the big exam, with religious readings and prayers. Wayne Newton, a fellow entertainer, claimed to have a note Elvis wrote in Vegas that expressed his loneliness and a plea for help. Newton wrote a song about it and made a music video, but Marty Lacker and Billy Smith were skeptical about the authenticity of the note. Elvis's final tour of 1976 started on a rocky note. On New Year's Eve, he played in Pittsburgh and then received a bomb threat. The plane had to be evacuated, and the perpetrator was eventually caught. Elvis wanted to fly back to Memphis to attend Ginger's grandfather's funeral, which was a rare show of support for someone outside his immediate family. Despite his efforts, Elvis's relationship with Ginger was strained. She didn't share his commitment, and her presence seemed to add to his problems rather than alleviate them. Elvis was working too much, and the stress was taking a toll. By January 1977, he was so frustrated that he skipped a recording session in Nashville, staying at a hotel for days without doing any work. He was sending a message to Colonel and RCA, but it was clear that his passion for music and performance was waning. Elvis's life was a complex mix of love, loss, and the pressures of fame. His relationships, especially with Ginger, were a reflection of his inner turmoil and the challenges he faced in his final years. One night, Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend, decided to go home. Elvis, who didn't want her to leave, fired a pistol over her head, but that didn't stop her. Elvis was upset and started seeing other women, even a 15-year-old schoolgirl named Rye Smith. But deep down, he really wanted Ginger back. Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, noticed the tension between them. He asked Elvis, "Why do you put up with her?" Elvis replied, "I'm just too old and tired to train another one." Billy could tell Elvis was struggling. Sometimes Ginger wouldn't come to Graceland for days, and Elvis would get agitated, asking, "Where is she? Why doesn't she stay here?" When Ginger did come, she would often leave early in the morning. One time, Elvis even told one of his guys, "Let the air out of her tires so she can't leave." Billy was fed up with this and told Elvis, "Got him, Elvis. Open the gate and let the girl go home, man. This is not a prison." Elvis didn't fire Billy but stayed mad at him for 3 days. Ginger didn't seem to care much about Elvis. 9 weeks after they met, he gave her an 11.5-carat diamond ring, costing around $70,000. But for Elvis, giving a woman a ring didn't mean much. He wanted to keep her around, and the ring was a way to do that. He even asked Lowell Hayes, his jeweler, to take the stone out of his Teasabe ring to give it to Ginger. Elvis wasn't planning to marry Ginger, but she believed he was. They even went window shopping for wedding dresses late at night. Elvis would describe what he wanted Ginger to wear, but when he said, "Yeah, and when we get married," he would turn to his friends and say, "Whenever that is." Marty Lacker, one of Elvis's close friends, thought the relationship wouldn't work. Ginger wanted to go out and party, and Elvis wasn't into that. Billy was suspicious, and had Ginger followed a few times. One night, she was seen dancing with a guy in a nightclub. Elvis thought she was faithful, and that's what mattered to him. Elvis went through different stages in his life. In the 50s, he was happy and carefree. In the 60s, he became more self-centered. In the 70s, he started to understand the needs of the people around him. But by the end, he was reminiscing about the past, feeling like he had no new challenges. After Elvis died, Ginger's mother, Mrs. Alden, sued his estate for $40,000, claiming he promised to pay off the mortgage on the house he gave them and to help with her divorce. Billy Smith called Ginger Gingersnatch and her sister Rosemary Poundcake, which was crude but showed how frustrated he was with them. Elvis had a pet name for Ginger, Gingerbread. One time, when Elvis asked Billy if he should stay with Ginger or find someone else, Billy suggested, "Why don't you find somebody your age? Somebody you can talk to and have a real relationship with?" Elvis replied, "What in the hell could a 42-year-old woman do for me?" In February, RCA tried to get Elvis to record again. They set up a studio in the racquetball court at Graceland, but Elvis complained of a sore throat and left everyone waiting. This was the last time they tried to record with him. During a tour in North and South Carolina, Elvis's performances were erratic. In Charlotte, he struggled with Moody Blue and gave up. The next night, he managed to perform it. Lamar Fike, another friend, saw Elvis in bad shape and warned him, "You can't keep putting yourself through this." Elvis joked, "I'll watch them lower your big ass into the ground," referring to Lamar's weight loss after an intestinal bypass. After the tour, Elvis's longtime friend George Klein was indicted for mail fraud. Elvis tried to help by reaching out to President Jimmy Carter, who had been a fan. He asked Billy to contact Carter, and they eventually got a call from Chip Carter, the president's son. Despite their efforts, George had to serve his sentence. In March, Marty Lacker moved to California to work as a salesman and get away from drugs. He sent Elvis a letter through Billy, telling him he was off drugs and hoping Elvis would consider the same. According to a friend, Elvis got angry when he read the letter, saying, "Got him, Marty, trying to reform me." Marty never heard back from Elvis and didn't get the financial help he asked for. Elvis decided to update his will in February. He talked to his father, Vernon, about it, and told a few people, including Billy, that they were in the will. On the night of March 3rd, the will was brought to Elvis to sign. Billy was there, and after everyone left, Elvis gave him the will to keep safe. A couple of nights later, Elvis showed Billy a section of the will, detailing what he was leaving to different people. He was proud of how he was providing for everyone. Marty Lacker later revealed that there were actually two wills. Joe Esposito carried a handwritten one in his briefcase, and Vernon knew about it, but couldn't access it. In his private moments with Billy, Elvis opened up about his dreams. He was withdrawn and leery of who he could trust. He talked about touring worldwide, and his desire to have a male child. He imagined his son having his eyes and face, becoming an entertainer and the most perfect kid in the world. He had specific types of women in mind for the mother, but hadn't chosen one yet. Elvis had a dream. It was about being on trial for his life. Colonel Parker was the prosecutor, and Red and Priscilla were witnesses. The jury had two sympathetic members, Saul Schwartz and Lee Abelser, who made his jewelry. The judge wore a white robe and carried a black medical bag. Elvis thought it meant the end was near. Elvis's health was failing. He didn't talk about getting old, but he did talk a lot about frozen embryos and artificial hearts. He was fascinated by the idea of immortality and cloning, but it was all just talk. He never really did anything about it. In March, Elvis's father, Vernon, had another heart attack. Elvis was scared. His father's health issues were a wake-up call. Around this time, Elvis lost a lot of weight, and people started talking more about how he looked than his music. It was tough for his friends to hear these comments. They knew Elvis was ill, but they also knew how charismatic he could be, even when he was struggling. Elvis's performances were a testament to his resilience. One time he was so sick that he could barely stand. His family and friends thought he wouldn't make it to the show in Tempe, Arizona, but he did. He put on an incredible performance, and no one could believe it. Another time, he was so out of it that he couldn't even find his hand. But he still managed to perform, and it was amazing. Despite his health problems, Elvis sometimes canceled shows. One time, he canceled 4 dates in the South. It was partly because he was fighting with his girlfriend, Ginger. They flew him to the hospital to give him an excuse, but it wasn't just an act. He had gastroenteritis and a problem with his back. The doctors also tried to detox him, but he only stayed for 4 days before checking himself out. Elvis's friends were frustrated. They felt helpless, like they were watching a runaway truck. They made a vow to keep him going as long as they could. Lamar told Elvis that he was abusing his talent, but Elvis said he couldn't help it. Elvis's drug use was a big problem. He would promise the world to Ginger to keep her around but still see other women. One of these women was Alicia Kerwin, a bank teller from Memphis. They went to Las Vegas and Palm Springs together, but the trip was rocky. Elvis took too many sleeping pills and scared Alicia and Joe. He had a stash of drugs and would mix them, which was dangerous. Alicia eventually told Elvis that she cared about him, but couldn't handle his lifestyle. In April, the Nashville Banner reported that Colonel Parker was putting Elvis's contract up for sale. The colonel said Elvis was becoming more trouble than he was worth because of his drug use and erratic performances. Elvis wanted to get rid of the colonel too, but he never got the chance. Elvis's business relationships were falling apart. Joe Esposito, his friend and manager, was on his way out. Elvis asked Billy Smith if he could take over, and Billy agreed, but the legal issues kept piling up. Joe, Dr. Nick, and their business partner, Mike McMahon, sued Elvis over the racquetball court deal. Elvis had to borrow $1,300,000 from the National Bank of Commerce and put Graceland up as collateral. He was angry about it until the end. 2 days after the lawsuit, Vernon filed for divorce from Dee. They had been married for almost 17 years, but Elvis never accepted Dee. 3 years earlier, when Dee left, Elvis offered her $10,000 to come back. It was a complicated and difficult time for everyone. Elvis's world was falling apart, but he kept going. His friends and family were there trying to support him, but they couldn't stop the inevitable.